He is an assistant director of the Institute of Alternate Dispute Resolution, and he's currently the mentor for Think India JGU. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhay, for the introduction. So let me just quickly tell you about our topic today. The topic today is biosecurity. Biosecurity is a concept which is described by WHO itself as a measures aimed at protecting the human health, agricultural production, and peoples and industries that depend upon them. So it has three basic aspects on which we are going to talk today. First is the epidemic and the pandemic prevention. Second is the prevention of bioterrorism. Third is the biological weapons convention, right? So kind of weaponized use of biological agents. Now, so Abhijit, welcome to the session. The first question to begin with, you see that there is an Ebola virus, which is based on a river. There is a Zika virus, which is based on a forest in Uganda. Then there is an Indian strain and a British strain of the COVID. But the virus is not Wuhan virus. The virus is SARS-CoV-2. So it seems to me that at the very beginning, they have managed to take control of the narrative through WHO or through the medical fraternity, whatever way. So how did this happen?
So see, several issues. In many ways, you control the narrative by placing your people in important parts of the ecosystem. So let's start with the first member of this ecosystem, which is Dr. Ted. I call him Dr. Ted because, you know, it's a caricature on Dr. Dead. But he's the guy who runs the WHO, accused of severe human rights violations, been the health minister of Ethiopia. His particular region of Tigray is currently under a siege by, well, kind of a semi-siege by Ethiopian government forces at the moment. And he got into this position entirely for two reasons. One is that China was determined to capture international organizations. And second, because there was this sort of withdrawal from all these additional useless bodies of the UN, like the Human Rights Commission, the World Health Organization, etc., which are basically just jobs for the boys. The WHO in particular, if you take it in conjunction with the Bill Gates Foundation, with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is one of the most closed, cartelized systems that would operate. Remember, all these people, the elections in the WHO are a joke. I know a lot of these people. I've worked with all these people. It's like, you know, it's like choosing between Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong. You know, to fulfill the choice of a multi-candidate election, they put the same candidate's name 15 times over. One in sepia tint, one in violet tint, one in red tint, one in black and white, one in gray shade. It doesn't matter. It's the same candidate. So you can go with the British candidate, the American candidate. They all come from a certain collective cartelized mafia of industry. Now, this is where Bill Gates's experience with Microsoft. I think now, because it's become an Apple world, I don't know how many of your viewers would remember, but once upon a time when it was a Microsoft world, before Apple took off, there were huge issues with Microsoft and their way of throttling innovation. And this is something Bill Gates has adapted to medicine in a very different way. They control all the academic publications, and therefore, and all the testing processes. So the academic publications plus testing processes means effective control of the market. So this is how you control a narrative. China controls the institutions. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation controls the academic narrative. At some point, there's been some kind of a crossover, primarily because of the sort of massive business interest that any American software company will have in China, irrespective. For example, the Google offices of China are much bigger than their India offices, yet they are banned in China. You're not allowed to use Google. You're not allowed to use Google Maps. You're not allowed to use any Google product. Well, you can use it with a VPN kind of a thing, but it's basically like that. So this is how you do it. When the turf itself is rigged, it doesn't matter what team is going to go play on that turf. If the turf is rigged, that's the end of the story. And that is what is happening out here, which is why this entire narrative is lost. And today we've seen this Congress toolkit or whatever come out, which has kind of reinforced this whole thing that it's the Modi variant and the India variant. So best of luck with that. And this is the same people who were saying that it should be called the China virus. So yay, best of luck.
So, I mean, that of course changes my second question, because I was about to ask you as to why, in spite of various pluses and various acts of omission and commission, China was never brought to accountability. Because obviously, since 2019 and December till the pandemic alert was declared sometimes in late January, there seems to have been numerous cases of omission and commission, including a direct statement by China that the virus is not subject to direct human transmission, which was actually tweeted by this Dr. Ted, as you call him. Okay. So that, of course, answers as to why this happens and why it is perfectly pointless to use the WHO mechanism to reach out to China. But some of our students have asked us specifically this, that, okay, fine, we understand that WHO is a rigged institution, but still the nations of the world have access to the UN General Council, right? And even at a diplomatic level, President Trump had talked about bringing China to accountability. So why did this not happen? I mean, what went wrong? Would you like to
So
comment
it's
on that?
very easy for when you want to hold somebody to account. It's very, very easy to, just keep shifting the goalposts, throw in a whole barrage of information, then say that it's politically incorrect to call it the China virus, accuse people of racism, etc., etc., etc. It's a classic case of media management and throwing them off count. But more importantly, what is happening is that a lot of the classified information, before it was circumstantial evidence, as of the last 2-3 weeks, we've been getting direct evidence, not circumstantial. The circumstantial evidence also had to do with acts of omission. For example, China saying, no, it's not airborne. China saying, it's not really a threat, etc., etc., then delaying the lockdowns and things. Now what we've been seeing is the direct acts of commission. The first act of commission we discovered was the gain function testing at the Wuhan lab. So for those of you who don't know, the gain function testing is where you isolate a particular virus and you make it much, much, much more virulent. It's a eugenics program, right? So for example, like with Rottweilers, you want to breed the most vicious Rottweilers. You pick which is the most ferocious in a litter, you mate them, and then you come up after about 3-4 generations, you come up with the most virulent vicious Rottweiler. It's the same in viruses, because the lifespan is shorter, you can do it in a much faster period of time. It's a similar function. It's not an exact same function, don't quote me on it. It's more of an analogy. So what happens is they were doing this gain function testing because the more virulent the strain, the better you can test the antidotes to it. The problem with gain function testing is it is also the first step to weaponization. Of course, weaponization requires a lot. Weaponization also means that you have to decide on the transmission model. You first have to make it airborne, or else you have to disperse it in form of an extremely fine talcum powder. Even the fabrication of the talcum powder is extremely difficult because you need something that spreads. A lot of talcum powders will just settle on the ground and they won't, fly with the air. So it's an extremely fine this thing. This is where the second act of commission comes in. And this happens, we know about this only since the day before yesterday, when Wired ran, not Wire.in, Wired, the American magazine, ran this piece, which is that the WHO's definition of what a micron is, of what air transmission is. Sorry, what is this bleep, bleep, bleep? Can we please get rid of it? It's really irritating and distracting. It's ये है क्या? ये बीप 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 होए जा रहा है?
I think this is something the only administrators can. I have tried to do it. It's a little distracting, but I don't know how to switch it off. I think when people unmute their mics, this happens.
Oh, okay.
We're working on it. Working on it.
Okay, Rahul, please try to stop this. Okay,
So
it's really distracting.
has been rectified. It has been rectified. You may continue.
Okay.
Okay, Atiji.
So what happens is that they basically screwed up on the definition of airborne, because the definitions of airborne weren't decided by how the particle behaved. It was dependent on the size of the particle, which was 5 microns. So initially, for example, apparently this had been airborne since day one. And nobody at the WHO considered it because they went by dogma, and dogma which hadn't been challenged. Even the definition of the particle transmission, the size of the particle, 5 microns, was determined in the 1930s and 1940s. And why is it an act of commission and not of omission? Because since day one, the news should have gone out that it was airborne, which is why we now know that washing your hands did absolutely nothing to protect you from the virus. Okay, it was pure air transmission across the board. So why is it an act of commission? Because last June, April, May, June, sometime during that period, a bunch of physicists sat down and explained this whole thing to the WHO, that your definition of, this artificial threshold that you've put on size of 5 microns is not the determinant of how a carrier particle behaves. Because the spray, it doesn't matter what the size of the spray is, it's going to have the same effect because it can break up in the atmosphere during transmission. So that is something they never took on board. They knew about it. That is the worst part of all of this. The WHO knew that its 5 micron definition was wrong by sometime in June last year, and they still did nothing about it. They refused to act on it. Remember, for a long time, there are tweets on Dr. Dead's Twitter account saying, do not wear masks if you are not ill. And by the way, he puts out this tweet after this entire conference with physicists that's happened. So there's been this entire set of crimes of commission, one on the part of Dr. Dead and one on the part of China, which we now know for a fact. It is established beyond all doubt that this happened. The question is, did it escape from the lab or was it put out from the lab? This is where the second crime of commission seems to mitigate the first crime of commission, because if you grow up believing that 5 microns are the limit of air transmission, as in under 5 microns is where air transmission begins, then you wouldn't have even bothered to apply your mind and believe that it was air transmitted and taken the necessary precautions, which is probably why it leaked out of Wuhan in the first place. Was it deliberate? Well, we don't know. We haven't seen any proof to it being deliberate.
Okay, so the next question, I will come back to this leak theory. But before that, let's look into something more fundamental and something more insidious, I'd say. The presence of a Chinese capability of bioweapons and the position of the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the scheme of things. First of all, why do they maintain an active BWP when none of their adversaries do? What exactly is the strategic use of the BWP here? I mean, if the US doesn't have it, why do they?
Look, the US actually has it, so does Russia. Probably so do we. Basically, any country with a large, remember, this can, unlike what you see in movies, where you can build things, one scientist can build things in a little lab, it can no longer be done in a little lab. There is a reason that most of these vaccines for COVID that have come out have been produced in gigantic laboratories using gigantic research and development wings. The mRNA vaccine, for example, it's the first time a vaccine is being made with mRNA, and that too being produced on such a large scale. It requires something called a bioreactor. Again, extremely advanced technology. China, in fact, does not have an mRNA bioreactor technology. India, surprisingly, does. It's one of the things where we're ahead of China. Now, what happens out here is that every country that has an advanced pharmaceutical uh, uh, industry has a bioweapons capacity. Weaponizing that capacity is one of the easiest things. Setting up the capacity is a big deal, pharma capacity, but weaponizing it is very easy. It is simply a case then of finding dispersal mechanisms. Because see, to research how to cure, you have to research the disease in the first place. So all research in disease involves gain function experiments. Some countries have transparency and mechanisms to regulate this thing. In India, we don't, in fact. In China, they clearly don't, or they're lying about it. But we all know that most countries do, in fact, have a bioweapons program. It's just that China's bioweapon program got exposed. And the problem is, unlike nuclear weapons, which have a certain stigma to them, there is no stigma attached to bioweapons. There's a convention against bioweapons. But have you ever heard of sanctions coming out because of bioweapons? Has any country ever imposed sanctions on another country because of bioweapons? No. It's very low on the list because it was considered the lowest of all priorities. Nuclear weapons was the top thing because of its ability to destroy so massively. Chemical weapons became an issue because of World War I specifically, and then the Iraq chemical weapons program during Operation Desert Storm, and then again during Syria. Bioweapons is something that is never ever discussed in public. And when it does become open, like the Wuhan Institute of Virology, for example, it is the ability to befuddle, the ability to spin remains very great because you can't say if the gain function testing was for weapons or it was genuine research into how to control it. They're both the same. Like I said, this is like that dharmic definition of intent. The action by itself is not wrong. So today, if I fire an arrow and it mysteriously goes from this window to the next window and pierces Shuvrajyoti in the heart, you can actually make a case saying Abhijit didn't intend to kill Shuvrajyoti, so it was pure. But was the intent there? So this is the dual use nature of weapons. In nuclear, it has been bifurcated very clearly. We know what kind of enriching you need in order to produce weapons quality uranium or weapons quality plutonium. In terms of chemical warfare, we know what is required to make a toxic product and how to disperse it. There are very clear markers. In biological warfare, because it is something that is transmitted from human to human and can be transmitted through something, say, like a Pond's talcum powder bottle, or a Christian Dior perfume bottle. It has never realistically been possible to control it. And one of the things of criminalizing something is to set a justiciable standard. Unless you are able to set a tangible standard of what constitutes weaponization, you can't criminalize it. And that has been another big problem with the Bioweapons Convention.
So would you say this is a generic problem with the convention, or it's a more specific problem with China? Because first of all, the Chinese program seems to be very unique in the sense the level of integration between the civilian program and the military program. That's quite unprecedented in the scale. The Soviets, if I understand correctly, on the other hand, had very segregated programs so far as possible. And also, since we're talking about gain function test, I believe, is actually outlawed in US. And thereafter, they probably shifted some of these research to China themselves. And even Anthony Fauci's name has come up in this whole Markey saga. So
Right. So
before
Anthony
I go into
Fauci
that,
funded.
yeah.
So Anthony Fauci seems to have directed funding towards Chinese gain function research. Gain function isn't banned outright in the US, but there are very, very strict regulations on what you can do, where you can do, and when you can do it. And also within what geographical limits of the United States you can do, precisely for reasons of quarantining and possible outbreaks and so on and so forth. So it's a problem with the convention, but it's an ongoing problem. The problem isn't with the convention. The problem is one of ideating a clearly defined standard at which point it is considered a weapons program. And that becomes a huge problem because a lot of very brilliant people have given this thought, and we have not been able to come up with a agreed definition. So, if you talk to say a nuclear proliferation expert or a chemicals proliferation expert, there are clear guidelines. The biological weapons proliferation experts are virtually non-existent. Why? Because we don't know what the proliferation standard is. That is the problem in this whole thing. Now, that suits China perfectly because China cheats on everything. There isn't a single convention that China hasn't signed that China hasn't cheated on. Nuclear weapons, for example, they still continue to provide Pakistan and North Korea with nuclear assistance. They act as the conduit for North Korea, Iran, and Pakistan to collaborate on their missile programs for delivery. As far back not as far back, as early as about 4-5 years back, they agreed under the grandmother clause to create Kushab 2 and 3 Kushab 3 and 4 reactors, which everybody knew was for proliferation, but they claimed it was a grandmother clause. We also know that within the last 10 years, they have transferred miniaturized nuclear weapons designs for battlefield nuclear weapons to the Pakistanis. So it's an environment that allows China to thrive. But that said, China would have done this irrespective, even if they had signed on. Let's be clear about that. Right? So it's not that rules hold back China.
Okay, so what exactly is the role of this Wuhan Institute of Virology in this? And this is my personal question because I am absolutely not an expert in this. Why would you have such a facility in the middle of a city?
So that is why in the middle of the city is the innocent part. What is the role is the not so innocent part. Now, why in the middle of the city? Because all biological testing facilities, in fact, all high-tech facilities except nuclear, because of the fear of nuclear, tend to be in cities. Why? Because you require an extremely highly trained cosmopolitan workforce who are not going to come into a rural isolated area to work. So even our nuclear reactors. So for example, if you take Kalpakkam nuclear reactor outside Madras, it's literally like a 40-minute drive from Madras. You can live in Madras and go work at Kalpakkam. Right. So that is how things are happening these days, because it becomes impossible to attract talent if you're out in the middle of nowhere. You need people value their lifestyles. The higher their expertise, the more they value their lifestyle, because they can command a greater price. So that is the most innocent of all explanations. Most of our biological facilities, for example, all lie outside Bangalore. What they are used for, civilian or non-civilian, I leave up to the viewer to decide, but they're all outside Bangalore. So the location is the most innocent explanation of all. The role is not. Because now we know beyond all doubt that the mutation that became the initial leaked virus was a gain function strain, which means it was an artificially manipulated strain. It wasn't a naturally occurring strain. Right? So the role of the Wuhan Institute of Virology now has been established beyond all reasonable doubt. And the original particular strain has now been established as a human enhanced variant.
Okay, and of course, we know that in 2015, the Chinese very openly had considered use of coronavirus as a kind of bioweapon. I think it is a bit unconventional to use coronavirus because, like, tell me if I'm wrong, but generally, a bioweapon would be a virus with a high degree of lethality, say an weaponized anthrax or something like that. Unlike coronavirus, which is contagious but which is not lethal as such, has around 1% case fatality rate. So, but Abhijit, do you see this as a kind of are all of these allegations true, or do you see as a kind of an escalating mistrust between the West and China, similar to what you had that nuclear competition in the 60s and 70s?
No, because so much of America is sold out to China that has such deep business interests in China. They are never realistically going to take on China. You saw Dr. Fauci's defense of China on in the US Congress. You have seen Biden go soft on China. So no, there isn't. I mean, there is every reason for you to mistrust China, but there's also a reason that America will never take action against China. And they will go out of their way to scuttle any proper investigation into who started this in China for a reason. So no. Also, this anthrax and COVID comparison doesn't work because see, anthrax can't do a human jump. Anthrax is direct contact jump, and it's based on what contact, say the powder that you get or whatever, where does it rub off and somebody else touches it. It is not airborne and things like that right now. COVID is. And China got a lesson on not, see, it is not the fatality that is used as a weapon. It is the economic destruction that it wreaks because of lockdowns and things like that that is used as a weapon. It is not a weapon of mass destruction. It is a weapon of economic destruction, which also kills a lot of people. In that sense, it is the classic, uh, 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 during the nuclear weapon race, there was the neutron bomb. And the neutron bomb was basically a fusion device that had been salted with cobalt. And the reason was that what a neutron device would do is that it would, well, I mean, this was an exaggeration because it killed as many people as any normal device, nuclear device would. But the belief was that it kills more people and it keeps infrastructure intact. Here, it's different. It doesn't kill too many people. It kills all the industry and businesses. So it's sort of a capitalist dream weapon come true. And the Chinese would have realized this because of the SARS outbreak. If you remember during the Hong Kong SARS outbreak, the economic chaos it caused in Hong Kong was spectacular. So they were probably the only ones to have an economic template to model the economic destruction that something like this would wreak.
Okay, so I think that sort of answers many of the questions that the students have as to why use this, why COVID, and why not something more lethal. So now the question that comes in is that if you looked into that 60 minutes in Australia, the theory that has come up is that SARS-CoV-2 or Wuhan virus, what it is actually a gain function form of a coronavirus that infected 3 miners in Hunan province, the RTGA13, which was enhanced and then got released. So, but what you are suggesting, it seems that it was not really an accidental release.
Correct. No, the
And
release was accidental, but the mutation, it wasn't a natural mutation. It was an
okay,
artificial strain that was accidentally released. Most probably because of WHO and international global definitions of airborne uh, of air portability, which are based on the size, the micron size of transmission.
no, so if it's an accident, even if it's an accidental release, then it's a disaster bigger than Chernobyl. I mean, and
Yes,
there's
Chernobyl never killed so many people. Chernobyl never killed so many people. We're looking at what, 3 million people dead?
yeah,
That's
3 million and rising.
3 million and rising. It'll ultimately reach about 4 million people, I guess. But that would be more than any previous war from here to the since World War II.
Yeah,
I mean, since World War II, you've only had starvation events like, the Chinese famine and things like that. You've never had a war that has claimed so well. The Vietnam War claimed about 3 million lives. So we've reached close to the Vietnam War. But it is, it definitely constitutes one of the great disasters of the century. The biggest disaster of the 21st century, for sure.
so we have basically now taken WHO out of the picture because WHO cannot be trusted upon, and the WHO investigation in China was an eyewash, which some of the experts themselves have openly admitted. And it suffered from massive conflict of interest, which would just, I mean, won't be acceptable to due process anywhere in the world. So now the question occurs that can you have this biosecurity enter into the agenda of the Quad? And can you have structures which would prevent such future occurrences?
No, you can't. I'll tell you why. For a variety of reasons. One is that uh, American business interests are severely compromised to China, number one. Number two, it comes back down to the justiciable standards. What constitutes a bioweapon? Where you can have a quad is in setting up an accountability mechanism for any future release of bioweapons. Who will be held accountable? Because see, it comes back down to, and this varies from country to country, is that you have crimes of commission and errors of omission. In some country, errors of omission are criminalized. As in, mistakes are criminalized, the intent is irrelevant, the action is criminalized. So you can create a body of law based on that. But again, the Quad doesn't have the heft to pull it off. It'll probably have to be the EU or somebody like that that pulls it off, because the normative power at the moment lies either with the Anglosphere, so the 5 English-speaking countries acting together, New Zealand, Australia, Britain, Canada, and America, or it lies with the EU. Nobody else seems to have the normative power to action this kind of a thing. So it's not, the Quad won't succeed at it.
So you believe that we need to have a new set of rules rather than new structures to counter this?
And you know, the exactly, new rules rather than new structures. But you also need to reform structures. The very fact that Dr. Dead is in charge of the WHO after all of this, and he's tweeting as if he bears no responsibility for anything. He is treated like a VIP wherever he goes, when in fact he needs to be in shackles in a war crimes trial somewhere.
So we have some questions about reform of WHO, but it seems to me that it is, I mean, I'm not taking this question simply because at this point it seems to me it is not possible to reform WHO, because it's just lost cause right now.
Till America
You have
is on
to,
board, you can't reform the WHO, correct?
okay. So now this brings us to India. Like, why some of our students are asking, why is India so silent on this? Because China is anyways not our friend, and China has expressed its hostility quite openly. And there is a spin-off question that how India can counter the advantage that China has already gained, because especially because of our second wave in our neighborhood. So can we just have a situation where we get back that space, get to the days of vaccine Maitri and so on and so forth? What do you think?
So no, the reason India keeps quiet about this is that our biological forensics, just like our chemical and nuclear forensics, is non-existent. We do not spend time on forensics. Our legal basis is extremely weak. We don't have international legal experts in this country. That is almost entirely dominated by the West. We do not have a very good foreign and intelligence service. They're too small, they're too under-equipped to be collecting primary source data. They are too undertrained on issues. We don't have policy experts and specialists who focus on all these things to be able to pull it off. And finally, there is the guilt of having been instrumental. You know, Dr. Dead wouldn't be WHO chief had it not been for India. India was seeking China's approval, which is why we decided to champion. China just nominated him. We championed him and advocated him to make him WHO chief. So there is also that guilt, which nobody wants to accept in India at the moment.
And what about countering China's influence that it has gained because of our second wave? Can we get back to vaccine Maitri?
No,
And
India has no influence. Let's be clear about it. India has zero influence. With your current economic performance and this complete socialist mindset that we have, that's been anti-business for the last 14 years. Basically, ever since Vajpayee left, there has been an anti-business environment in this country. You're in no place to take on China at all. India does not have the wherewithal to take on China on anything at the international stage at the moment. No.
okay. So that's kind of disappointing, but of course you saw that incident with Adar Poonawalla, that how we are treating the man who is essentially the pillar of our own vaccine program, right? So now I have a series of disappointed student questions. Like the first question itself, is China beyond all ethical norms? Which is very, I think that is self-evident.
It is.
Then
It is. It is. They've see you. They don't accept established definitions of ethics. They are not you can argue that rejecting ethics is amoral, it is not immoral. But in the case of China, I have never come across the borderline between amorality and immorality blurs immensely. Remember, this is a leadership that has killed off 7 times more Chinese were killed by the Chinese Communist Party than were killed by the Japanese Imperial Army.
True.
So it is not a country or a leadership system that you can expect any form of ethics from.
And then also the question, if it's an accidental release, then how come there are no cases in China? I mean, what is the secret of their
No. There
supermarket?
were a huge number of cases in China. In the first wave, it was very nasty in China. See, the fact that they controlled cases, they controlled the narrative, they didn't allow the news to spread. Remember, Wuhan was under severe lockdown. There were people dying of starvation inside their houses because they weren't allowed out. Their houses were sealed from the outside. They were using drones to tell people to get back in their houses and shooting people on the streets.
But
I
now
think
there
people
seems
have
to be
forgotten.
very few.
See, that is a second wave, third wave issue.
Okay.
Second waves have always been particularly bad in India. If you remember the 1917 influenza pandemic, the first wave at that time, like the first wave this time also, generally had a very minimal impact. It was the second wave in 1917 that was the killer, and it's the second wave today that is the killer. Mind you, what has happened that we're seeing in the second wave in India right now is that it is hitting the people that it skipped in the first wave. In the first wave, it was high congregation areas like Dharavi and things like that that got affected. In the second wave, it is all the mohallas and localities and colonies that skipped the first wave that seem to be getting affected the worst. In the place I live in Delhi, there were 36 cases of corona in the first wave, and there were 5 or 6 deaths, which is a very significant death rate compared to the total cases, in a small colony like mine. In this wave, we haven't had a single case in my colony. Even though it's got a slum at the middle, an extremely high density slum at its middle, there's been not a single case out here. You see the same pattern repeating over and over again wherever you go. So this is pattern number 1. Pattern number 2, in the second wave of the influenza pandemic in 1917, it spiked all of a sudden, and within 2 weeks, it started tapering off, and within a month, it had completely died out. You are seeing the same thing here. It was a sudden, very, very, very rapid spike. And then it just completely tapers down. And when this ends, it will end in a week. As in not a week from now, but when you see the tapering off beginning, it will taper down to 0 within a week.
Yes, but Vijay, the footage would stay forever. I mean, massive
footage.
damage.
So let's not confuse that with our government's incompetence. Both center and state government have been extraordinarily incompetent in the way they've dealt with things. But that is a different issue. I'm not getting into Indian government incompetence because that, is you guys all read newspapers, and depending on your political slant, you will either read The Wire or you will read Op India, and you would have decided if Modi is the murderer or if Mamta is the murderer. So, that's entirely up to you.
Yes, but true. I mean, of course, but I had a supplemental questionnaire, like the question plus observation. I think one of the reasons China could handle it, stop it at Wuhan at whatever cost, is because of their extraordinary system of mass surveillance that they have. So everybody in China, so they have massive data on movement. They have a great amount of data on personal medical history. I mean, they can just take your file from the hospital at any point of time, whether you want it or not. So that gives them that capability that we don't have here in this country. And this is probably what allowed them to manage
No, not
it,
really.
if
No.
not
Why
completely?
China managed the second wave was because they have no respect for privacy in that country. So they would have done all
Yeah.
kinds of tests on you at the airport, which would be completely illegal here. Invasive tests would have been done on you. It would have been caught and it would have been contained. Remember, there is no more mask and social distancing compliant country than Japan. And Japan is seeing a horrible second wave. Nobody's covering it. But if you actually look, Japanese hospitals are overburdened. People are dying without oxygen in Japan. There are no hospital beds in Japan right now. And Japan skipped the first wave.
Okay.
Right. So it is actually worst in Japan at the moment, which people aren't reporting about. But the issue is that Japan can't do the kind of invasive tests and curtail your personal freedoms and things like that the way China can. That is why China is succeeding in the second wave, where India and Japan have failed in the second wave.
Okay. So the final question that I have, then I'll ask a few questions that is being typed here. What did, again, I mean, this is some of the questions that students also had. Like, if anything, the narrative which is built is, I mean, people would now believe that it was a bioweapon, it was released, and even if they had no culpability, they would now believe that China did. I mean, the regime has basically exposed themselves in a way. And also, they have not demonstrated any great technological capability. The Chinese vaccines are shit. They have efficacy levels of around 50.7%. That is not even, I mean, I won't even consider that a vaccine. And
Which is why I
yeah,
said it was an accidental release.
yeah.
Which is where the micron definition comes in. That is why I'm saying even now that it is an accidental release. It was not deliberate biowarfare.
Yes, but I mean, I was reading some Australian TV and Australian coverage. I think there is a section of people which sees this as a kind of declaration of war on the West, even if they are heavily invested in China. And the Indian perception of China is, of course,
Look, that's a very
always low.
political view. That's not a factual view, because if you take all the facts, and they're entitled to their political views, but if you take the facts on balance, it seems to add up to a very accidental launch, though the development of the strain was very, very intentional. Right. Now, the question is, how do you hold China to account? It's obviously not an act of war, but China must be forced to pay reparations. The issue is, unless you consider it an act of war, you cannot force China to pay reparations. The problem is, most decision makers in the West are so completely compromised to China, they will never agree to hold China responsible. So you really have, it's a futile discussion saying, should we hold China responsible, when everybody knows that China will not be held responsible.
Right. So now I would have some question from the students who is typing here. So there is a question from Mr. Samir Guduru, who says, do you see any compromise given there's a rise of cultural socialism in the West, intersectionality and global Chinese document? So what I think he's asking in so many words is China using the oak in the West for its purpose, especially with reference to the spread of virus?
China is using, well, I wouldn't say China is using the wokes, but the wokes make China very happy. Because the wokes destabilize a country in a way that the Red Guard, Mao Zedong's Red Guard destabilized China. So they see all the parallels and they're absolutely thrilled about it. Because when they look at all these woke pansy fests in the West, and self-imposed social controls and political controls and all of that, they are thinking, oh my God, to get out of the hellhole we were in, we had to crush all this nonsense. And the West is basically going back to where we were in 1950 and 1960. We should be helping them along with all of this. The good thing is, of course, they don't have to help them along because because the West is destroying itself without any external help. They don't need any external help. So, best of luck.
So the next part of the question is actually more interesting. So how can India's own strategic thought and action be customized for establishing and building such narratives? That is to say, how can we use their social divisions? If the Chinese can't we?
भाई देखो हमारी औकात नहीं है. Let's be very clear about it. The status of humanities in this country is abysmal. The teaching of humanities in this country is abysmal. We don't follow first practices. We don't follow a critical thinking approach where you're taught to question. It's all learned by rote and things like that. At your humanities, you don't do any research. There is no funding for primary research in India. So, in order to seize a narrative, you have to spend money. You have to invest in people. Like Lee Kuan Yew used to say, if you pay peanuts, you will only get monkeys. तो बंदरों में इंसान के नैरेटिव्स छीनने का सवाल ही नहीं उठता है. बंदर बस आपके हाथ से बनाना छीन सकता है. बंदर ने अगर आपके हाथ से किताब छीना, बस किताब छीना, उसमें जो विद्या है और ज्ञान है वो नहीं छीना ना. तो ये बात है.
Okay, and the last question, I think is what is the one most crucial thing that the Indian foreign and economic policy lack? So I think you just answered that.
Yeah.
Why is it that we lack that heft? But the next part of the question I'll ask is, has the Indian bureaucracy actually let us down? Not the politics, but the bureaucracy.
Big time. From day one, they've been screwing up. Look, you can't siloize policy. All policy is intersectional. You can't say we will lock down without then thinking about people who are out of their towns and villages and things like that, and without thinking about the economic consequences. To date, we have not seen a analysis or an opportunity costing or a alternative costing document or white paper that has been put out by the government. Which means it wasn't even based on any calculations. So right from the beginning, you had this thing of siloized policy, which never considered the entirety of the situation. Then we never considered bulk buying vaccines, which should have been done right in the beginning. And we should have invested in private companies right in the beginning to start producing these things in bulk. Right. Then there was no auditing of the dispersal of funds when the emergency health powers were centralized. When they got decentralized by the end of September, there was no auditing कि भाई हमने पैसा दिया है oxygen के लिए, इसके लिए, उसके लिए. Have you actually implemented any of it? Zilch. Then what happens is that you screw up spectacularly on the pricing policy. Your pricing policy is designed to keep production volumes low. Why? Because if you're not going to pay the money, the guy has no incentive to expand. He has to make back his money, remember? So no incentive to expand. By January, there were a lot of newspaper articles and all of us on Twitter were warning saying, boss, you're at this rate, you need to avoid the second wave, you need to have vaccinated more people by now. You need to have been producing hundreds of millions of vaccines, not 100 million vaccine over the next you need to be producing 100 million a month, not 100 million over the next 4 months. They ignored it. And mind you, the government itself issues a warning saying you are not following regulations on the 7th of January. You're getting too lax. They're issuing advisories, but they're doing nothing. So there's been a compound of errors of omission, which unfortunately in India are not criminalized. And I believe they should be criminalized because this has led to deaths. This has led to lakhs of deaths. We will be touching what, 4 lakh deaths soon, or have already touched 4 lakh deaths. I don't know. I think we crossed 3 lakh deaths. So, it has to be criminalized. And to date, not one official has been sacked. Not one has been held to account. Not one has apologized for their handling. Nothing.
So last question is, can we expect any major change in globalization post this? Will the world be the same after the pandemic?
Had it been Trump, yes, you would have seen a movement. You would have seen a great movement towards 3D printing and additives, which would have basically destroyed the low to medium manufacturing base of China. Now, not anymore, because the Biden administration is a globalist administration with a vengeance. They are not going to disrupt trade patterns, so you will see exactly zero change. Zero.
True. And Biden is probably losing his mind also. I mean,
Yeah,
I
Biden,
don't know.
forget his mind. He's not even alive. जब वो उठता है, has he been reanimated from the dead? Got 1 foot in the coffin and 1 foot in his bed. So, you don't even know if he's alive or dead or when he's going to die.
So, I mean, I think his junior must take over right now because, my dad has
No,
Parkinson's and
she's
I
a very
can
dangerous
see.
woman. Remember, she's even more compromised and dangerous than the president is. Let's not forget that. She has
But
been a
at least
puppet
she
for
is alive.
Putin.
I mean,
No, alert is a different matter. That makes it even more dangerous.
America has no
You
government
would
right
much
now.
rather have a corporate puppet who is brain dead than have a corporate puppet who is in full control of her faculties and can inflict enormous damage. Right?
Yeah, so should we just fight with fire? So somebody is asking,
No.
shouldn't we develop our bio weapon and release it on China?
You can't. What are you going to achieve? How are you going to prevent it from coming back on you?
I don't know. It's the
Bioweapons can't be
vaccines.
controlled.
Yeah,
No,
that
you
is, I
can't.
suppose, why. Yeah, I
So,
suppose why
see,
that's
the
why
Indian,
nobody
one
uses
second,
them.
Shubhrajyoti, 1 second.
Yeah.
The point is the current Indian strain, so-called Indian strain, there isn't a strain, there is 13 different strains. Why?
Right.
Because you had the British strain come in. That was basically the super spreader was the farmer protest. You had the South African strain come into Mumbai, which started spreading because of laxity. At some point, we don't know where these two strains have combined together. We now have a total of 15 strains in India. The two original, South African and British, plus 11 mutations that have developed literally within a month in India, plus 2 extraordinarily virulent strains in the south of India. So you can come up with something like this, but it's the genie out of the bottle. You can't control it.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Abhijit. I think that's all we have time for today. I will invite our student, Mr. Abhay, to give the vote of thanks. Well,
Yes. Yeah, so I would like to start with a vote of thanks, and I would like to thank all the students who have brought their presence to this meeting, as well as the chief guest, that is Abhijit Iyer Mitraji, and also our professor, that is Subrajyoti Gupta, sir. Thank you all, and this has been a very enlightening discussion regarding the biosecurity and China in that context. Thank you.
thank you, Abhijit. We'll hopefully have you again over some of the issues. And China continues to be our fascination. They at least keep us engaged for next 100 years, I think.
Let's not use positive terms like fascination.
Yeah.
They are more like, you watch a horror movie. You're not fascinated by it, but you want to see, the gore and the destruction and the death. It's more morbidity than it is fascination in that sense. But thank you so much, everyone. I hope you found that worth your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit. Thank you. Bye.